You know what? Not many people actually clap when it comes to talking about ISO standards, so, kudos. Do we though? Because the one thing I did realise is that as much as, and this is no slight on librarians, because one thing, I'm not a librarian, is that we love our standards, but we're really terrible at following them. So, and this will sort of take you along that way. So just a quick acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge, especially because I'm coming from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations in Naarm, Melbourne, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. This project that I'm talking about today has been completed from many parts of the world, and so I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people of those countries as well. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and like to extend to anyone that is a First Nations person joining us today. And given that we've got Invasion Day on Monday, I'd like to say that sovereignty was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So a bit of an agenda. Who am I? Hopefully most of you know who I am. Give you a bit of a project overview, go through the design, the end product, some stats, because people love stats, and what the next steps are. But for a quick who am I am the Deputy CEO of CAVAL. I'm president of VALA, which is a Victorian, what does it stand for, Hugh? I really should know this given that I'm the president. Victorian Automated Library Association, but we're just calling it VALA. And I'm kind of merging that all to say I'm part of CAVALA, because kind of all matches together. I'm also recently a director of Open Australia Foundation. Please do go see what they do. They do things like Right to Know, they vote for you, planning alerts. It's everything about opening up democracy for Australia. I'm also a subject matter expert and a product committee person for Project ReShare, which is the project I'm talking about today. Also responsible for what you're all seeing today, which is the Everything Open conference and the session selection committee. Thank you. And you can contact me there, and I'm on Mastodon. But as a disclaimer, I'm not a librarian, but also that this project is from my view and my view only. There are some things that I may accidentally drop that is my view and my view only, because work may not necessarily endorse it, but that's fine. So, a little bit of terminology, but first I want to know how many of you have been to a library? My kind of people. How many of you have gone to the library and could not find what you actually wanted? Has anyone done an interlibrary loan? Even better. Did you know that it follows a standard? Hugh does, because he hears me rant about it all the time. So just a little bit of terminology: resource sharing, RS, document delivery, which is the electronic version, interlibrary loans, which is the physical version, the ANBD, which is the Australian National Bibliographic Database, which is a database of all the bibliographic records held within Australia, and obviously ISO 18626. There is a little bit of a joke whenever there is a presentation on this that you have a bit of a drink, because it gets mentioned all the time. So feel free to take a shot when you hear ISO 18626. So first things first though is CAVAL. So I'll be mentioning CAVAL quite a bit. As I mentioned, I'm the Deputy CEO, and we're actually owned by all of the Victorian academic universities in Australia, in Victoria, sorry. And we were brought together about 40 years ago to build shared infrastructure, because the universities and the libraries realised very, very quickly that cataloguers was a dying breed, and we needed to hire one amongst many rather than hiring many for each university, and also reducing effort. So from there, we sort of learnt from our lessons and built a whole suite of services, including storage, and what we have is a shared collection. And each of the shared collection pieces is a last copy of anything that might be considered of research value amongst our membership. So interestingly, we have the entire Mills and Boon collection, which some people actually think is interesting. A first edition of Return of the King, but also we've got random things like a Malibu Barbie camper van for some research purpose. We've also got some dentist chairs. So if you're ever in Melbourne, please do feel free to come and visit because it's actually quite a cool place to be. We've also got a reciprocal borrowing program so that university students can actually borrow from another university without having to actually sign up as a patron. They can just go, I'm a student, can I borrow something? Cool, we'll go do it. We also provide things like shelf-ready services. So if you go to a public library, you can borrow a book in a different language, and that is actually probably touched by one of our staff. They catalogue it, they make it discoverable, and they also put all the contact on the books and the barcodes and the labels and all of that sort of thing. So an actual human sits there and puts it all on. We also run a mentoring program, but this little section here, which is around digital platforms, is around the shared digital infrastructure. So ReShare is the one that I'll be talking about today. Now, the library tech world is a little bit sad when it comes to open source library management systems. You can see here that 0.7% of public libraries is actually running an open source system, which interestingly, Hugh's responsible for one of the libraries that's running open source. In academic libraries, it's just as grim. Now, I'm not sure how up to date these stats are, but it's from librarytechnologies.org. But as you can see, it's hard to get into the market if you're an open source vendor. A little bit more. Has anyone used Trove before? Oh, my people. So Trove is run by the National Library. They're a single point for the treasure trove, and I spelled that wrong, of all things Australian. There's 14 billion digital items within Trove itself, but it also provides a connection point for all the libraries within Australia, and also museums, special libraries, galleries, all of that sort of thing. It provides shared infrastructure around cataloguing, digitising, obviously the National Bibliographic Database, and also a central point for the interlibrary loans and document delivery. Now, this is important because not many countries have a single point to facilitate interlibrary loans or a catalogue in itself. There is a little bit of confusion in the States that the Library of Congress might do that job, but that's not the case. Australia is very much in a privileged position to be able to have that. So if there is any opportunity for you to show some love to Trove and the National Library, please do, because they are making sure that we keep our data as ours and that we make sure that it's shared and shared equally. Now with document delivery and interlibrary loans, you can see here that the stats are dropping, and they're dropping pretty quickly. But the thing is that budgets are also dropping pretty quickly, and access to subscription services, you know, it's not easy, and collections are shrinking because libraries need to make more spaces for people to sit in, not for books to sit in. So to be able to facilitate loaning of items between libraries, they made sure that they kept interlibrary loans going despite the numbers dropping. So the TLDR of it is that the National Library decided to keep the resource sharing model going, but because of end of life of their previous system, they went out to tender. Now, they have decided to make sure that it allows for reciprocal service models, which means zero costs amongst the libraries, automated load balancing, which means that a set of libraries will be created depending on, you know, geographical distance or what groups of libraries that you're part of, and depending on who loans more, they can supply or they can borrow more, all of that sort of thing. And also allow for a platform of future innovation. But the one thing that made it really, really interesting is that the system must be ISO 18626 compliant. The reason why that is important is because there's a lot of other library vendors out there that are running API-driven interlibrary loan systems, but it means that it's very insular and it's got a very closed source and closed wall garden sort of feel. No one else from any other system can play. This will actually allow for any system to play along if they wish. So the timeline, back in the 1980s, the bibliographic database was created, and the first interlibrary loan sort of happened in 1989. And it was actually a digital service. And in 1990, the first iteration of the ISO standard went live, and VDX, which is what was retired recently, was the vendor at the time. We also made sure that in 2003 that the ISO standard was implemented so that universities specifically could use their own systems to manage interlibrary loans and interact with the system, rather than using the national system. And in 2022, which is where I got the stats from, was the resource sharing landscape review. Then there was this massive tender process. The tender process went for so long that eventually I'd given up and didn't think that we'd won the tender, but surprisingly we did. And in 2025, the old VDX system was retired, and what we now call TPRS, which is the Trove Partner Resource Sharing System, went live. So with the tender, we were supposed to build for the future, especially around equity of access. There's also copyright laws that we need to take into account. So Australia's got some really unique copyright laws when it comes to interlibrary loans. In the US, it's either you can or you can't, but here it's like, which part of the act can you actually follow? The other part was that we needed to be able to question things on First Nations right of apply and access protocols. Other countries don't necessarily take this into account, but we take these things seriously. And if we need to ask if we can have permission to do an interlibrary loan of these items, we need to make sure that we can ask those questions. We also needed to take into account formalised and informal networks. So in Australia, a lot of libraries tend to create their own consortial groups where they can borrow amongst each other first and then expand out. But there's also some informal ones around the health network where health libraries can borrow from each other quite easily. And also the Australian National Bibliographic Database needed to be incorporated in there as well. And this was sort of one of our first designs of the system. So thanks to Hugh Rundle for this library map, but you can actually see that this is how spread the libraries are in Australia. So equity of access is really, really important when it comes to interlibrary loans. If you're in the top corner of WA, you don't necessarily want to be borrowing something from the bottom right corner of Victoria, right? Because it could take days or weeks for that item to get there. So what we try to do is we try to network the libraries together so that WA's got their own libraries, they're working amongst each other. Let's borrow there first and then expand out if we can't get the item. So equity of access was really important. We also had to make sure that we built the system so that people could just use spreadsheets to borrow things if they had to, and not just have to have a full library management system to do interlibrary loans. So the design itself, there's tiers. So there is a reciprocal request. So every time you try and borrow something from another library, it used to actually cost a certain amount of money each time you did that. But now we've brought in a reciprocal thing where libraries can borrow from each other freely. There's also the paid option, so some libraries can't actually afford to hire interlibrary loans people, so they need to make sure that they cost recover when they provide those services. And we need to also do things like service level, so how urgent do you need that request? We find that a lot of law libraries need things really, really quickly within 2 hours, so that may cost more compared to a 3-day turnaround. We also need to do different variations and combinations of the request pools as well. So there might be different tiers and different service levels that we need to all account for. And it becomes a bit of a spreadsheet nightmare once you start looking into it. And also each library can be members of multiple networks. So CAVAL as a library, we could be a member of the Health Libraries Network, but also the Academic Libraries Network because we want to share with everyone. but that means that other people can get access to our stuff and we can get access to their stuff as well. Uh-oh. That is broken, so I'm going to skip that. So networks is one of the most challenging problems that we had to solve, and it wasn't until I'd drawn this diagram that we kind of realized that a library can be a member of many networks. Networks don't necessarily have to be defined by their library type or region, and also libraries can prioritize when they're searching and requesting. Because we tend to know that library A can ship things really, really quickly compared to library B, but you need to make sure that there's some equity and some load balancing in there. Expanding out, we actually cleaned that diagram up a little bit. So you can see here that library A is part of network 1, same with library D, C, and B is actually part of network 2, and it kind of expands out from there. So in IRL, say University of Canberra is part of the higher education network. They're also a CAVAL member, which they're not in this case, but as an example, and also in the network for the national system as well. But they might also be part of the health network, and they all interchange requests between each other. So there is a lot of activity that happens. So what about this ISO standard that I'm talking about? Here's a bit of a happy path. So a student or a patron finds an item. They really, really need it, so they submit a request to the library. And that's the discovery phase. They send it to the library and say, I need this item. Can you please get it for me? The librarian, who is a bit of a detective, because sometimes the patron will actually just say, it was a red book released in the 1930s. I need version 1 or edition number 1. That's all the information I'm going to give you. Have fun. It is a dark art when it comes to interlibrary loans, so I do send a lot of praise to them. Then the request moves to the broker. The broker goes, okay, I'm going to look at the database, see who's got it, create a list, look at how much each library has shared, and send it to the one that's requested the most so that they have a little bit of load balancing. We also make sure that they're open, because sometimes libraries aren't open for any reason. We also make sure that they're allowed to loan that item too. So the catalogue will actually say if the item is loanable or not, but also make sure that there's things like the version's correct, or the edition or the issue is correct as well. And then we move to the lending part, which is the easier part, surprisingly. So Trove's happy path is obviously, you see here that the requester sends in the request, it searches the A and BD, and the bibliographic database does its thing, creates the rotor, does some load balancing, the item gets delivered. Super simple, happy path with zero interoperability. A happy path across systems, though, is, say, for example, a university is using their own system, but they're not actually, they're part of a different group of libraries. You want to be able to actually throw the request across the fence and go, can you please deal with it in your network rather than in mine? So the request gets thrown across. A little bit more complicated. We're just going to go around in circles until we find something. And you can be part of as many networks as you would like. And at the end of the day, as long as you get the item, you don't care where it's come from. I wish I didn't have to say that, but some people will find it wherever they can find it. So the bit that we're going to focus on is this giant green square, which is where the ISO standard comes in. So what this is a university library that tends to run Alma or Rapido, which is an Ex Libris product. They are the requester. They want to send the request through to the interlibrary loan system hosted by Trove. And there's also the ability for the Alma Rapido library to be a supplier as well. So they're throwing requests from their system to our system. But two systems, both alike. This is where the standard falls down. ReShare likes chatting. They love chatting. It's all about the chat. Exlibris and Alma are all about getting things really, really efficient, and we just want to cut out as many steps as possible, which means that you don't necessarily all follow the standard in the exact same way. And this is where the messaging falls down. Is in ReShare, you can see here already in the second step, they're expecting a message of expects to supply. Alma just goes, well, if you're sending it to us, we're just going to supply it to you. So you should just assume these things. So it skips a message already. ReShare then goes, will you actually supply it, even though you think you might supply it? Alma will go, yes, we're happy to supply it. And then it kind of just goes down from there. But because it breaks at the second step, there's a lot of sort of conversational work that has to happen. The other thing that happens is that sometimes there's things called conditionals. And the library may loan it to you, but you might only be able to use it in the library itself because it's super fragile and we don't want you to take it home and write all over the book. The other thing is that there are some subscriptions that let you print out the document and hand it to the student. The student then has to hand it back and you have to destroy it. That is a weird nuance, but it exists. And so you have to account for that. Now, ReShare uses the chat function, so you discuss it and go, yes, I agree to it, and away it goes. Alma goes, yeah, it's already in the rules. You should just assume it. Don't worry about conditionals, let's just move on. So we had to do a little building. So we worked out very, very quickly that even though you say that you're compliant to the ISO standard, it does not necessarily mean that you're compatible. And there are a lot of systems out there that claim that they're ISO 186 compatible, but they're really not. So this is how it looks for anyone that wants a little bit more technicalities. It's all, so Crosslink is the broker that sends out the messages to the various systems, and it's run with a Postgres database in the back end, and it does a whole bunch of searching in different databases and sends out requests using the ISO 18626 protocols to the various suppliers. There is also what's called a directory service. Now this is where all the rules about the library come into play. Whether the library is open, it's closed, what its address is, who the contact librarian is, who the billing person is, all of that sort of thing. What sort of loan rules do they have? That's all part of the directory, which is used through a JSON API. The problem with that is that that's not standard either. So everyone will put in, we will loan Monday to Friday, but except, lunch times on Thursday. There's no standardized way of saying that. So we're trying to work out a standard around that at the moment. So this is how the system looks. ReShare, we've deliberately built various cost mechanisms in place. You can see that there's a call number. There's a location of where it is in your stacks, especially around the shelving location. You can also add notes to the library, so you can have notes going across in the message. And you can also put in some standardized conditions around library use only. You're not allowed to reproduce it. You require a signature. The special collections one, as I mentioned before, and also watch over use in library only. So what was a year-long project? We actually did the go live in several stages. So it was over a period of 15 weeks. I came to Canberra for the launch day, and it was the most anticlimactic day ever. Because turns out you press a button and people are just sitting there going, I might log in and I might do a request, because there's not many requests that happen in the system. You're kind of just sitting there waiting for some activity. And it took think it was 5 hours before we saw our first request come through. So we're all just sitting there with, I mean, you could see we were quite happy, but then we realized that nothing was happening for quite some time. So direct access was when we had 300 libraries all come live within those 2 weeks. There was about 1,200 people that we had to create usernames for and send out all the passwords and all that sort of thing. We had to get them all trained up and integrated into the system. And that's when we did the free requesting amongst each other. We then allowed for the Alma Rapido, which is the ISO 18626 users, go live within a longer period because universities take some time to implement different systems. So we went live over July and August. And then the pay for peer tier went live in August, where we started seeing some financial transactions happening within the system as well. Now, left to our own devices, we found out very, very quickly that we could send emojis through ISO 18626. And there was an interesting conversation with the developers of Ex Libris going, should we really be allowing this to happen? Like, well, if you're Unicode compliant, it's kind of just going to happen. So there was lots of emojis in the first couple of days. I think we're sick of it now, but it's quite lovely to see that there's hearts and dollars sort of flying around. This is the sort of workflow that a librarian is now going through. They will look through the National Bibliographic Database first, then log in through the Trove Partners resource sharing page, and then this is sort of the landing page that they end up in. And it's actually quite a neat and clean system that they're dealing with now. The old system had about 40 buttons within the menu option. This is now brought down to 5, which is not too bad at all. So as of September, we had created 1,200 user accounts. We had about 11,000 requests, and we're now up to about 38,000 as of a couple of weeks ago. Patrons will now get their items within 8.5 days if they want a copy. 1.85, sorry. And loans within 8.25, so that's really because of Australia Post, not because of the requesting itself. And you can see here that there's 43 networks that libraries can be part of, and obviously the different unique suppliers and unique requesters. So there's some lovely stats there for you. And weirdly, I've finished really, really quickly. But if you'd like to see the ISO standard, it's just at illtransactions.org. Would like to have any contributors. This is a little bit of a graph so you can see when the activity sort of happens, and you can see when the weekend sort of hit with its giant dip. But the requests are going up and up, which is great to see. So thank you. That was a whirlwind tour.
Thank you, Sarah, for a very wonderful presentation. We've got time for questions if anyone has any.
Apologies as this may be a daft question, but so earlier on you had a diagram about how, you know, you've got the library network kind of thing. The system will search through each different kind of library or whatever and go and look for a thing until it finds it. Is there a possibility of a network engineer's worst nightmare of a loop to exist within this system?
Oh, hell yes. Especially because people don't tend, but it's actually a human loop, in the way that people don't tend to catalog things in a standardized way. So it might not actually find a hit, but the actual record does exist and they're just not searching for the right one. Or they've got the wrong, so if a library's holding years 2000 to 2025, they might write it completely different to the next library that just says held. And you'll end up just in a loop just trying to find the same thing. You know exactly what library you want it to end up in, but because it's automated, you may not actually get there and you're just circling around.
Thank you.
Would you do anything differently?
I would actually try and convince other vendors to talk with us more, because as you can see, there was really only one other library vendor that was willing to talk to us. We tried really, really hard to get probably one of the biggest library vendors to talk to us, and they weren't interested. They were more interested in the API-driven sort of ecosystem. The one thing I am very, very proud of, though, and I would, I'm just really, really proud of, is that we delivered it on time and on budget, which is rare for a government project, right? And the fact that we did that and we had fun at the same time is something that I really treasure, because that never happens with a government project or in an IT project in general, right? We made sure that we had as many voices at the table as possible, and we made sure we learned from it and had fun every time.
Any other questions? No, looks like that's it for questions. So thank you again, Sarah. That was a fantastic talk.
Thank you. Sorry for the shortness, though. I thought I would go for a while, but no, I sped up.
Getting paid to have fun is always worth it. We have a small speaker gift for you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you again.
Thanks all.